Let's be provocative. Let's be provocative. It's 12/22/2019. No votes have taken place yet. We are almost 50 days out from Iowa. I think we're a little bit less than 50 days out from Iowa. What's the point of prognosticating if you can't do it somewhat at a distance? The closer you get to it, the less interesting it gets. Let the lines of logic play out in the way that you think they're going to play out. I'm going to make a prediction. And I'm going to give you the reasons for this prediction. And take it with a grain of salt. I'm just a man, and I'm fallible, and I look at the world through a particular way that objectivity is somewhat of a myth in this case. So I accept all of that. But I will give you my argument, and you can pick that argument apart on the items that you think are right and the items that you think are wrong, and to the conclusions that you may end up with. I also accept that you have two very elderly men that are in the race. Either or both of them could drop dead tomorrow. I don't wish that on either or both of them. Despite I want my candidates to win, I don't want him to win that particular way. But you get my point. Things can happen. These hands of gods that come in and change what we consider to be the typical momentum that the things are going. So, fair enough. Caveats. That's it. All things being equal. Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren's campaigns are effectively over. Yes, they have money in the bank. Yes, they're still walking. No, they may not necessarily entirely know that their campaigns are over, even though they might have a suspicion about the difficulties that their campaigns are facing. But I'm going to make the argument that ultimately, they may be in the race for a while, but their campaigns are effectively done. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. We're going to have patron or contributor appreciation on Christmas Eve. My wife is off on that day, and we think that will be just an awesome way to bring in Christmas. So definitely join us, the Christmas Eve show. I don't know, let's say 6, 7 o'clock. That gives us a pretty decent time to kind of go into the evening. I don't necessarily know if we're going to go into Christmas, but I do think that would be a cool way to bring in the holiday. But let's get to this one. Something happened at the debate the other night. People are talking about it, but they're talking about it in more of a surface way. I want to get to the nub of why I think this is a desperate play by Warren, and why it does get across somewhat of a problem that I think her campaign notices and realizes. But that's not just with Warren. Warren threw a punch. Now, Warren doesn't throw punches. And so the fact that Warren threw a punch in and of itself means something went on in her campaign to make a choice to say, we need to do X. What's just as interesting, if not more so, is that we need to do X knowing that we are not the strongest people to do it. Meaning, we're going to get hit with something back. But we believe that our attack takes more, despite the fact that we're going to lose out in this particular attack. Buttigieg got caught in a wine cave. This is him. This is the facilities. Beautiful wine cave. High dollar donations. This guy's a Democratic donor. And it was brought up during the debates. They were being trolled mercilessly. This is Nina Turner. Look at her shirt. Look at her shirt for the moment. This is Jeff Weaver. Pete's Wine Cave. This is a Bill Clinton pick. Pete'sWineCave.com. Trolling him all night, going after him all night. And it wasn't just Warren. It was also Klobuchar. And yeah, even Sanders, making him look like a child in this particular debate. Many of them went after Pete. I've said multiple times, Pete Buttigieg is not a thing. And yet, many of these people went after Pete. I'm going to explain why. Warren's case, however, is a little bit more acute. She attacks Pete, knowing that Pete is going to hit her back. She attacks Pete very specifically on this notion of a wine cave because she wants to put it in people's head. Wine cave. Wine cave Pete. Pete's wine cave. It comes across, it reeks of a particular corruption. It's onerous. By the same token, does Warren have legs to stand on to throw this punch. Listen to this. Again, two things. The fact that Warren threw a punch, that's not something she typically does. And the fact that she knew what was going to come back at her. And she still threw that punch anyway, believing that imprinting in people's mind Wine Cave Pete will supersede whatever Pete Buttigieg hits her with. Even though I think I disagree with her on her theory of the case on this. Take a look at this. This is Democratic debate. Elizabeth Warren out of the blue sucker punches Pete Buttigieg. And this gets into a really good exchange between these two. But I want to show you the reality of it afterwards, meaning the day after.
Senator Warren, you would be the oldest president ever inaugurated. I'd like you to weigh in as well.
I'd also be the youngest woman ever inaugurated. I believe that President Obama was talking about who has power in America, whose voices get heard. I believe he's talking about women and people of color and trans people and people whose voices just so often get shoved out. And for me, the best way to understand that is look at how people are running their campaigns in 2020. You know, I made the decision when I decided to run not to do business as usual. And now I'm crowding in on 100,000 selfies. That's 100,000 hugs and handshakes and stories. Stories from people who are struggling with student loan debt. Stories from people who can't pay their medical bills. Stories from people who can't find childcare. Now, most of the people on this stage run a traditional campaign. And that means going back and forth from coast to coast to rich people and people who can put up $5,000 or more in order to have a picture taken, in order to have a conversation, and in order maybe to be considered to be an ambassador.
Thank you, Senator Warren.
Those selfies, no, I want to finish this. Those selfies cost nobody anything. And I get it. In a democracy, we all have a lot of different points of view, and everybody gets one vote. But here's the thing. People who can put down $5,000 to have a picture taken don't have the same priorities as people who are struggling with student loan debt or are struggling to pay off medical debt. I'm running a campaign where people whose voices get heard. We can't have,
Thank you, Senator Warren.
We can't have people who can put down $5,000 for a check, drown out the voices of everyone else.
Thank you, Senator
They
Warren.
don't in my campaign, and they
Mayor
won't
Buttigieg.
in my White House.
Mayor Buttigieg.
This is aimed directly at Buttigieg. A question about Obama saying who should be in office, meaning people who were younger and that type of thing. Meaning the question had nothing to do with Pete's wine cave. She turned that question into going after Pete. That everybody knew it was about Pete, even though she didn't necessarily use his name. Why? Because the notion of Pete's wine cave looks so bad. I mean, ultimately, it looks like influence peddling. It looks like Pete is just like everybody else, despite the fact that he has a new identity. Meaning, before the guy was black, now the guy's gay. You're reshuffling people with different identities, but for the most part, the same ideology. That's what it looks like. It just looks like corruption. So Warren points that out. And yeah, like I said, the trolling that was being done on Pete in this case was also pointing that out. Well, Pete has to respond to this. Pete has to respond to this. Listen closely to what Pete Buttigieg says.
Buttigieg, you had your hand raised. Well, can't help but feel that might have been directed at me. And here's the thing. We're in the fight of our lives right now. Donald Trump and his allies have made it abundantly clear that they will stop at nothing, not even foreign interference to hold on to power. They've already put together more than $300 million. This is our chance. This is our only chance to defeat Donald Trump. And we shouldn't try to do it with one hand tied behind our back. The way we're going to win is to bring everybody to our side in this fight. If that means that you're a grad student digging deep to go online to PeteForAmerica.com and chip in $10, that's great. And if you can drop $1,000 without blinking, that's great too. We need everybody's help in this fight. I'm not going to turn away anyone who who wants to help us defeat Donald Trump. We need Democrats who've been with us all along, yes, but we also need independents worried about the direction of the country. If you were a Republican, disgusted with what's going on in your own party, we're not going to agree on everything, but we need you in this fight, and I will welcome you to our side.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Senator Warren.
I hope you heard what he said. Basically, look, we're going to need all the money that we can get in this particular fight. I am not going to turn any money away. Now, this attack that Warren is making here is not wrong. She's absolutely right. If that guy can give millions of dollars to the Democratic Party and lobby and get all that money, and that money is not going to be a benefit to my guy, then my guy or whoever else is running in the race can also point out this cash, to some degree, sullies the candidate. Now, keep in mind, Sanders' theory of the case for this particular election has been class. Just like Boris Johnson's theme has been Brexit, Sanders has been class. His argument, for the most part, has been that our political space has been taken over almost by an oligarchical class that consider us an appendage as opposed to being the government itself. And there needs to be a corrective mechanism that comes in that focuses the might and the angst of the public itself. That's his theory. Now, if he's right, then this wine cave doesn't go down well in the electorate, which is why he's screaming about the wine cave. Or, in this case, Elizabeth Warren is screaming about the wine cave. The problem is, Elizabeth Warren is not Sanders. And she's completely susceptible to being hit back on this point. Now, either her staff is absolutely incompetent or they consider this just a desperate need to do this, meaning this was policy. This was a change that Elizabeth Warren and her campaign said this was necessary, despite the fact that she is one of the weakest candidates to make this point. Listen to Warren herself make effectively the same argument that Buttigieg just made.
Right. So, and during that time, you've done calls to wealthy donors. You've done big ticket fundraisers. You put together a pretty good war chest. I think about $11 million that you had amassed. What does that say about what you were doing before? If this is the right way to do it now, why now and why not before?
So look, I've never actually been in a deeply competitive primary. I get it. Republicans come to the table armed to the teeth. They've got all of their donors, their wealthy donors. They've got their super PACs. They've got their dark money. They got everything going for them. And I'm just going to be blunt. I do not believe in unilateral disarmament. We got to go into these fights, and we got to be willing to win these fights.
So this just applies to the primary. Like, were you to get the nomination, and or anyone else to get the nomination, like, just raise all the money you can, however you can.
Yes, but here's what I want you to.
That's Pete's argument. Now, Warren had that argument first. Pete ends up with that argument now. So the problem becomes, the moment that you throw this punch, you know that just a few months prior, your argument was, I'm going to take all the money in the world when I get out of the general, or out of the primary. The operative question immediately becomes, that Pete Buttigieg raises on the stage that I've been raising for months, is that if it's okay for you to take it in the general, why don't you take it in the primary? And are you just not taking it in the primary so you can stand beside Sanders as a one-to-one and stand on a debate stage and make this very specific argument? The problem is you evolved on this issue immediately in the presidency, and all of the money that you've raised has not been low-ticket donors, meaning the money that you dropped into your campaign that I've also mentioned did not come from these low-dollar donors. I'm just saying, for her to throw that punch, she had to know what was coming back at her. And she had to also believe that the Pete Wine Cave thing was more important. The moment that you can show a video like this, that looks bad. Because that's her making Pete's argument. That's her making Pete's argument. I wouldn't even be shocked if Pete Buttigieg's campaign intentionally used her framing in order to make his case. Because when they went on that stage, they also knew that this was going to come up. They keep going. They go back and forth.
45 seconds to respond.
So the mayor just recently had a fundraiser that was held in a wine cave full of crystals and served $900 a bottle wine. Think about who comes to that. He had promised that every fundraiser he would do would be open door, but this one was closed door. We made the decision many years ago that rich people in smoke-filled rooms would not pick the next president of the United States. Billionaires in wine caves should not pick the next president of the United States.
Mr. Mayor, your response.
You know,
Again, legit. This is legit because she's right. If she was just a mind in a void and she said this, she would be absolutely right. Let's hear Buttigieg's reply, because this reply is the problem with this attack coming from Warren.
according to Forbes magazine, I am literally the only person on this stage who's not a millionaire or a billionaire. So if this is important, this is the problem.
That's not a point. That's not a point. That's nothing to clap over. So what? Are you trying to say that because you're broke, that somehow you're going to take a perspective that may not necessarily be in alignment with the billionaires that are paying you? This is kind of like an identity thing in a weird way. But let's let him keep going.
With issuing purity tests you cannot yourself pass. If I pledge never to be in the company of a progressive Democratic donor, I couldn't be up here. Senator, your net worth is 100 times mine. Now, supposing that you went home feeling the holiday spirit, I know this isn't likely, but stay with me, and decided to go on to PeteForAmerica.com and give the maximum allowable by law, $2,800. Would that pollute my campaign because it came from a wealthy person? No, I would be glad to have that support. We need the support from everybody who is committed to helping us defeat Donald Trump.
We would.
The purity tests you can't hold up to, that bites. They keep going.
We would like to bring in everyone, but obviously, Senator Warren, I'd like to give you a chance to respond.
I do not sell access to my time. I don't do call time with millionaires and billionaires.
Sorry, as of when, Senator?
I don't meet behind closed doors with big dollar donors. And look, I've taken one that ought to be an easy step for everyone here. I've said to anyone who wants to donate to me, if you want to donate to me, that's fine. But don't come around later expecting to be named ambassador, because that's what goes on in these high dollar fundraisers. I said no, and I asked everybody on this stage to join me. This ought to be an easy step. And here's the problem. If you can't stand up and take the steps that are relatively easy, can't stand up to the wealthy and well-connected when it's relatively easy when you're a candidate, then how can the American people believe you're going to stand up to the wealthy and well-connected when you're president and it's really hard?
Judy.
Senator, I've got to respond. First
Mr.
of all,
Mayor, we're
if
going
you
to give you one
can't
more
say
chance to
no
respond.
to a donor, then you have no business running for office in the first place. But also, Senator, your presidential campaign right now, as we speak, is funded in part by money you transferred, having raised it at those exact same big-ticket fundraisers you now denounce. Did it corrupt you, Senator? Of course not. So to denounce the same kind of fundraising guidelines that President Obama went by, that Speaker Pelosi goes by, that you yourself went by until not long ago in order to build the Democratic Party and build a campaign ready for the fight of our lives, these purity tests shrink the stakes of the most important election.
Judy.
We'd like to bring everyone in. We'd like to bring everyone in. We'd like to bring everyone in, but
Both sides were right. That's the wow part about this. The back and forth that took place between the two, both sides were right. Warren should bring up his wine cave, or at the very least somebody should bring up that he's in there with the wine cave. Buttigieg has to somehow defend that, so he deflects with this notion of, look, I'm not being bought by people giving me $2,800 checks. Well, that may or may not be true. It's not necessarily you're being bought by the people who are giving you the $2,800 checks. It's more so the influence peddling, the getting a lobbyist job after you get out of office, getting your family, for the most part, in good, decent shape, getting paid for speeches as you go gallivanting around the globe with people who give you $100,000 just to hear you talk. I guess my point is, it's not so much that the $2,800, it's more so the influence of the people who are in the room, who are there shaking your hand and giving you a card saying, talk to me later. She's not wrong for bringing that up, especially with the whole notion of a wine cave. Problem. Everything Buttigieg just said there in response to Warren was right. It's worse than that. As I kept pointing out, if you're okay with it in the general, why aren't you okay with it in the primary? That's the whole point that Buttigieg makes. Look, you're making a purity test that you yourself can't even subscribe to. So the question becomes, why would Warren do that? Why would Warren do that? It gets worse. Look at this. This popped up. AP. Warren souvenir wine bottle pops up in big donor debate. On Saturday evening in June 2018, with temperatures in the 70s and the Red Sox playing at Fenway Park, supporters of Massachusetts Senator Warner gathered at the city's winery, Boston, for a fundraiser. They were treated to songs by Grammy-winning artist Melissa Etheridge and heard remarks from Warren, who was months away from announcing her campaign for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. For the top donors, those who could contribute or raise $5,400 per couple or $2,700 per person, there was a VIP photo reception and a premium seating. For them and others who gave the least $1,000, there was also a gift, a souvenir wine bottle. Now that looks bad. That looks bad because you attacked the guy on stage for doing something that just a year ago you yourself were doing. It gets worse. Look at this. Elizabeth Warren, candidate for the United States, Wednesday, June 6, 2012, 8 p.m. at the home of Ken Ryan. Now, right here, Ziad Jilani. What's interesting is Warren once did a private fundraiser with the exact same address and host as Pete Buttigieg did recently. That looks bad. Now, the catch here becomes a few things is happening. Why are these guys hitting Buttigieg this way? Why does Warren feel she needs to throw a punch when she clearly is going to get hit back with something along the lines of, you were doing the same thing, how are you hitting me for this? Now, Warren did that because she had to do it. It was an act of desperation. Take a look at this. Look at Warren's polling. Down 8 in this Emerson poll that just came out. Warren, distant third in this poll, early state voters. And if you look at the Real Clear Politics average, Warren, again, distant third. And not just distant third, look at where she came from. She goes up and collapses. But I want you to look down at the purple line for Buttigieg. As Warren goes down, he goes up. They're feeding off of the same bloodline. She knows it. And because she knows it, she's stuck in a precarious position of, I need to get my points back from him and I need to expose him. If I can get this notion of a wine cave, maybe that gets more resonance than me, for the most part, doing the exact same thing. The catch here is that the issue for Warren is not that it's the exact same thing. I don't believe Pete Buttigieg is the thing in the first place. But her issue is, at this point, disingenuousness. Meaning the attack that Buttigieg is wielding at her is, you're being disingenuous. You were doing the exact same thing that I'm doing now. And unfortunately for Warren, this attack feeds into this notion of being disingenuous with Medicare for all. Meaning, her problem is that this builds on itself to a certain degree. This woman is attacking him for something that she was doing just a year ago. How does that work? And what is your perspective when you come away with that assessment, when a day or so after the fact, all of this stuff pops up of wine hosting, wine event, or souvenir wine event, or this one? My point is, the key thing here is Warren and Buttigieg are both accurate in their attacks on one another. And the problem is that the attacks on each other just so happens to be true. Neither of them come away with this looking good. And in the process of these two fighting, like this food fight at fourth, it establishes the top two candidates, be it Sanders and Biden, for what they are. clarifying the field in a weird way that makes Warren and Buttigieg fighting at third and fourth with, by definition, Sanders and Biden fighting as the frontrunners for first and second. The longer that fight takes on between Warren and Buttigieg, the longer it makes it look, from a political optic standpoint, that the top two candidates in the race are the two that are going to be the main runners. Now, in Warren's case, like I said, she had to do this. Buttigieg was eating into her numbers. Warren, or Sanders, also, just to be clear, eating into her numbers. As again, Warren went down, look at Sanders. He was showing movement, trending upward. The thing is, Buttigieg seems to got the bigger bump on this, with Sanders being more consistent. She understands that Buttigieg's rise is her fall. And ultimately, Sanders, from his standpoint, she's not going to get those points. She needs them from Buttigieg, which makes him fair game from the standpoint of an attack. There are only two questions in this. They're important questions. Is it anti-Semitic for Elizabeth Warren to stay in this race, knowing that Sanders has better plans? He's more trusted on his plans. He's been doing this longer. She's clearly collapsing in the polls. In this other poll, she was down 8, and another one I've seen her down 10. Is it anti-Semitic for her to stay when there's no chance for her to win this race? And when she drops out, will she support Sanders? Now, yes, this is tongue-in-cheek because they do this to Sanders, or at the very least they used to do this to Sanders. But there's one point that I want to make before I leave. The reason why they're hitting Buttigieg. Buttigieg is not a thing. He just has one very specific trait. Buttigieg's overall support, I looked up this cross table and it's right. 97% of his base is white. Now, that's not good, bad, or anything in between, but in the political space, there are certain consequences for that, meaning you're probably not going to be able to win a Democratic primary because the entirety of your base is white and you need somewhat of a coalition to make it work in the Democratic process. And that's with half of the Democratic base being white, and he gets 97%. That's astonishing. So why does that matter? It matters because New Hampshire and Iowa just so happen to be the whitest states in this country. And if Buttigieg loses there, he's out the race. If Sanders wins there, especially in both, meaning he gets a certain momentum from winning both states, it starts to call into question this notion of electability, especially from the standpoint of Biden. Buttigieg is doing well in Iowa. Look at this, 22, Sanders 20, Biden 18, Warren falling to fourth. New Hampshire, Sanders 19, Buttigieg 17, Biden 14. Meaning Buttigieg is being able to pull 1 and 2 in both of those states because ultimately that's his key demographic. The moment that you get away from that, it goes down and goes away. My point is, Buttigieg is not a thing. The question becomes whether or not Warren is something. And the issue here is that the attacks that Warren is leveling on him, or for the most part, these guys are fighting one another, takes a spotlight off of these two, which these two fight each other, but there's no fall off of that because these are the top 1 and 2, and these guys are ideological fights. You guys are fighting over wine rooms, which is a fair game fight. But it's a fight that's taking place at third and fourth, with third and fourth being a distant separation between the first two. Optically, this looks bad. From a political sense, the fact that this article comes up a day after you make a huge thing about the wine cave, that hurts, that looks bad, and it looks disingenuous. That's my argument. My issue here is that these two are nullifying one another in regards to the polling. They're feeding off of the same blood vein. There are many people who are in the Warren camp that would go to Sanders, and you can see Sanders' polling numbers go up. Fair enough. There's also a large contingent of that camp that have floated to Buttigieg. And potentially, in her mind, will float back. The catch here is that the attacks that they're leveling on one another just so happens to be true. Warren's case, you are just like every other establishment politician, you're just a different face. Buttigieg's point, you're disingenuous because you also played this kind of round table. Now you want to be holier than thou, making this argument. This bites for both of them. There's no winner in this. Warren is not going to eat Pete Buttigieg alive and then start eating into Sanders' coalition. Sanders and Biden coalitions, for the most part, have found themselves to be sturdy. Buttigieg's hasn't. In her mind, I can get whatever I need from Buttigieg in order to bring me back up to the top tier. And that's the direction I need to go with it if I'm going to have any contest or any potential in this contest. I don't see that happening. Again, provocative, yes, 40 some days before any votes have taken place. But I'll stand by that. I mean, I could be entirely wrong. I will save this video just to see. But dead man walking. They just don't know it yet. They just don't know it yet. Mayor Pete is toxic. It's scary when he flashes his anger. Yeah, he was pissed off. Every candidate stole idea from donating Chink. Space Down Productions Gaming Clan Archive. That's a mouthful. That's a mouthful. Once Biden fails, it's all over. Rockley, yeah, I agree with you. Trudy, I hope Sanders is an atheist. I know I liked his statement about his beliefs. It's doing the right thing and caring for people. It is, Trudy. You know, that's always hard, though, right? I mean, because ultimately we're stuck in this thing where, like, space doesn't care. You know, if we end up in a nuclear war, all of us kill ourselves off. If we have capitalists messing around with the food supply in order to maximize their profit and accidentally drop something into the food supply that ends up killing a lot of people, turning people into zombies and eating brains, nothing cares. There's nothing out there that looks at this and weeps. It doesn't care. There's no looking at it at all. It just fades away as if it never happened at all. Maybe some ancient civilization or some future civilization will come, dig stuff up, and wonder what was it like when they were on Earth. But from the grand scheme of things, if there is no perspective and no point of view, there is no caring. The reason I say that is because an argument for politics gets difficult at that point because it's grounded just based on us. Like, there's no absolute value in this. Ultimately, the value is always relative and contextual. So in our political space, we say people shouldn't go hungry. People shouldn't sleep on the streets. And we have an idea of the world that we want to kind of give it its run, give it its due. Now, this idea of the world is not necessarily entirely self-serving. This is this notion of we can have a better world. What does that better world look like? And how do we get that accomplished? I guess my point is somewhat basic. I want to make sure I don't stray. Wait a minute. Damn it, I lost my placement. Oh, right, I know what I was saying. Look, the snapshot it. There's no absolute morality in this case. Like, there's no God scripture that you can go by that says, all right, God said do X and God said do Y. And even if God did say do that, I mean, you know, we don't necessarily know what God is outside of in his own context. He could be the kid that gets picked on for all we know. I guess my point is we are stuck awash in a reality where we're just kind of bumping around and we come up with these ideas of what the world should look like. And those ideas rub against what others people think. Now, there's no right and wrong in this. There could be people who are lying about the material effects of their world, but from the standpoint of whether or not they care if people starve, you can't say they're wrong. You can only say they're wrong to your context. That produces somewhat problems because then at that point you have all sorts of political ideas and spectrums where people can kind of balance it. It's hard to get a coalition in order to make that work. Not to mention you're always in a competitive process that even if you do something right, you can be attacked for doing it right? It's a fuck fest. It's a fuck fest. My point is, Sanders' argument, though, is more of a collective self-interest. Yeah, there's a moral argument to it, but the moral argument is couched in collective self-interest. Why do you want oligarchs running your system? We ourselves should be able to have policies where we look at human beings with value. That's an ideological belief, but it's one that you can get a coalition of people around to enshrine that as a hegemonic belief set. His point is to go beyond just getting politics changed. His point is to go into getting people's point of view changed about themselves as workers in this country or just as people in general. I feel you. Whether he's an atheist or not, he almost has to couch the arguments outside of faith, which I would argue he should. If Bernie endorses Warren, will it help Bernie? No, Marcus will. That's fucked up. I don't even want to think about that. And right now, I don't have to. Again, no, I'm just going by trends in this case, so don't misunderstand me. And one of the trends is that Biden can win this. Let's, stop fucking around. There are, 40-something days. The trend has shown Biden to be ahead in the national polls. We don't do elections from national polls, so that's always somewhat of a dodgy figure. But it's fair to say, if Biden places poorly in the first 3 states, any notion of electability gets shattered. So the notion of a national poll gets a little bit dodgy when you take into account that there could be momentum effects going into other states, especially if somebody looks much stronger and what they're saying jives with what you want. Meaning there's no discontinuity between these are the things that I want, but I also want this guy to win and this guy can't. There's no discontinuity between those things. I could be wrong. Just the man. More good jobs cause even more good jobs. Yes, Trudy, that's true. I agree with you. More disposable income, dropping that disposable income into the system itself, etc., etc., etc. All right, guys. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all. Oh, patron appreciation or contributor appreciation is going to be Christmas Eve. Let's go with 7 o'clock. In fact, let's make it 6. Let's make it 7 p.m. I'm going to have to write that down. Like, share, subscribe.